Hello, everybody. My name's Roger Mackenzie. I'm an Assistant General Secretary at Unison, the Public Services Union, largest union in the UK. It's a real honour that I have to be chairing this webinar this afternoon. It's a really important webinar because I think what it does is that it helps us to globalise our struggle. Far too often, and understandably, we spend a lot of our time dealing with the immediacy of what's in front of us. And sometimes it's too easy to forget how important it is to remember that we are part of a global struggle. And that's what we're aiming to do with this webinar, is to have that discussion, link our struggles, but also to think about what are the really practical ways that we can move forward. I think the last thing that we need now as Black people is another academic discussion about racism. We know what many of the issues are. We need to consolidate those issues, but also we need to build power for working people wherever we are. But as this is the TUC Black Workers Conference that brings together Black workers from lots of different sectors, lots of different industries, lots of different workplaces and parts of the UK. What we want to do, obviously, is to concentrate on that issue that has become one of the dominant issues of the last year. It's always easy, I think, just to talk about George Floyd and the murder that took place of George Floyd last year. And I've been in all too many meetings where people have forgotten Breonna Taylor, and we ought to say her name and remember her name too, where people have forgotten about Ahmaud Arbery and what happened to him last year. But frankly, what's happened to so many people. And we are seeing a rise in levels of racism across the world, which has meant that so many people have likened what we are experiencing as Black people, the levels of racism that have taken place across the country, as the other pandemic that's taking place. So we're going to discuss some of these issues this afternoon. I'm sure it's going to be a really informative discussion. The panel that we have is absolutely stellar. We have Aisha Hamouda from the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions. We've got my brother, Bill Fletcher Jr. from the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists in the United States. Zaneli Matabula, who's the Deputy International Secretary of the Congress of South African Trade Unions. And we have Anatalina Lourenco, who is the Secretary for Combating Racism of CUT of Brazil. So I really want to welcome all of our speakers for taking the time to join us at our conference today. And I'm really looking forward to your contributions and to help us to frame that struggle that we're all embroiled in at the minute. So without further ado, I should say we're asking all of our speakers to speak for 8 minutes. 8 minutes, a very symbolic number, remembering what happened to George Floyd and how long it took to kill him. We will, after all the speakers, hopefully have time for some questions, to take some questions from people watching, listening to the debate. And I hope we'll really be able to do justice to this time that we've got. So I'm really thrilled to be here, really thrilled to be able to share a platform with our guests. And without further ado, I'm going to ask Aisha from the Palestinian General Federation of Trade Unions to take the floor. The mic is yours, comrade.
أكيد. مساء الخير وأنا سعيد.
Good evening, and I'm happy to be with you in this webinar, which is special to the Global Day of Discrimination, especially what happened to our colleague George, which is the title of sacrifice in discrimination, especially in Palestine, to talk about discrimination, because we are the only people who is still under occupation now, and we have a lot of breaches are happening to us. I add my voice to yours so that there is no discrimination in the whole world, so that there should be respect to human beings first. There should be equality, a real equality in the working force and the whole world, so that we as humans can live in peace and in security without having any exploitation that might lead to losing lives. When I speak about our colleague George who lost his life, I'm talking about the last stage of all the breaches, especially to the black workers. We reiterate from Palestine that there should be a louder voice. And what there is the importance of revolution. There should be real justice between human beings, and so the countries which have the biggest title, they should apply the UN agreements regarding human rights. If they are exercising discrimination against certain sectors of the society, there should be a real change in the community, so that we get real equality and real justice, so that all human beings can live in equality with the minimum possible amount of human rights. I'm speaking about in Palestine. We have seen something that is the Israeli employers who touched our Palestinian works. There's a lot of the enslavement. First of all, they took the land of the Palestinian people, and they forced Palestinian workers to work in the land that they stole from the Palestinians. So this is so the Palestinian people are working in their own land, which was usurped from them, stolen from them. So this means there are breaches towards our Palestinian workers. It's just like what happened to our colleague George, because a lot of Palestinian workers, they are moved, they are taken from the Palestinian territories to work in the occupied territories. This is not only a danger to our workers, and without any application of the standards of the world working regulations. So there is breach of human rights. So we raise our voice with you, we the Palestinian people. There should be respect. There should be respect of the human being in wherever they live, in any geographic part on the world. If there is respect to this human being, if there is no respect, there will be a big issue. Because if there is no equality between white people and black people, we, the Palestinians, we demand there shouldn't be any discrimination between Israeli workers and Palestinian workers, because we feel that there is real discrimination between them. Also, from this portal, let me say, I am member of the Secretary General of the Palestinian Federation of Workers, and I work for the female workers. Unfortunately, that the occupation, the Israeli occupation, not only breached the rights of workers, but also they confiscated all resources, confiscated water and electricity, and we cannot control not even the land where we live. So the biggest catastrophe which is hitting our essential resources is that the dumps where the wastes are thrown, they are causing cancer to any water resources that go to the Palestinian people. So this is a breach of the rights of the Palestinian people. I'm linking the pain that you have, and as a revolution in the whole world. There should be justice to black people. There should be also real justice to all people who are suffering from inequality, whose human rights are breached. So we join you. We have our voice with your voice so that we'll have a global campaign so that there is no exploitation to Black people or to Palestinian people who are still suffering from occupation. So the first thing for us, there is unemployment among Palestinian women. Even when we put some development policies, where we are living, the geographic area where we are living, where all the resources are confiscated. So the unemployment in our land is nearly 40%, which is the highest rate of unemployment in the world. Also the environment which is related to the working place in Israel is nearly during the coronavirus crisis, there is some sort of enslavement. Some of our workers, female, were working in the areas which are infected by the coronavirus, and they were forced to work there. So there is breach of their essential human rights. For the so this touches your campaign today, because forced work or forced labor is bad. So I'm happy today to be with you. We in Palestine, we extend our hand to you so that we get onto the campaign with you, whether in the media or among the people or in the international community, so that put forward our complaints. I will be in this meeting and I will listen to you so that we will have a message that to be sent to the Palestinian people, our solidarity with you and your solidarity with us. And I also, it's important to highlight everything that is being exercised and to countries who have the title of to apply human rights while they are really breaching human rights. So they have to be punished more than the other countries, because they pretend that they are applying justice, but they are not. I would like to be thankful to you that I stick to the time allocated to me.
Thank you.
Thank you, comrade. Can I just say, on my own behalf and on behalf of Unison, just to send our solidarity to the people of Palestine in your struggle. It's something that Unison has always supported your struggle. We will always support your struggle. And me personally, I've been attacked for supporting your struggle over the last year, and I make no apology. I will continue to support the people of Palestine. It's one of the most important struggles that we have on the planet just now. So solidarity, comrade, and thanks for your contribution. Can I go on to our next speaker? Our next speaker is Bill Fletcher Jr., who is, amongst other things, amongst many things, is from the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists in the United States. Bill is brother of mine, who we work together on the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists and also the Global African Workers Institute as well. So Bill, the floor is yours, and welcome, comrade.
Thank you very, very much. It is a pleasure. My greetings. Good afternoon or good evening, depending on what part of the world you're in. Good morning. My thanks to the TUC for inviting me. It's an honor to be on this panel. When I was invited for this panel, I started identifying notes towards a presentation. And then the other day, actually yesterday, I read something I had been sent, and within it, there were the following words. The TUC uses the term Black worker to describe workers who are viewed as culturally and intellectually inferior because they are perceived as non-white and often share a common history and experience of oppression and exploitation through colonialism, imperialism, and contemporary capitalism. And when I read that, I immediately thought of how profound a statement that is, and how it is different from the way we use the term Black in the United States. and that the statement is much more akin to what Steve Biko articulated, what Babu from Zanzibar articulated, and others, where they looked at Black not as a phenotype, but in effect as an experience, to borrow from Mahmoud Mamdani. And the way that I like to frame it is that Black is the color or the uncolored, depending on your point of view, of the racially oppressed. And I wanted to start there, and I wanted to focus on that point for a moment, because I think that there's a number of implications. In the United States, we use the term Black synonymous with African American. So if you're African American, you're Black. If you're Black, you're African American for the most part. In the late 1960s, early 1970s, there were many anti-racist social movements that identified very strongly with the African American movement and the issue of Black consciousness. And there was and there was sometimes of an overlap of identification. In the 1970s, however, there was something that I noticed happening in the US and to some extent in other parts of the world, where there was a growing sense of ethno-nationalism. So rather than identifying with other racially oppressed people, there was this tendency that I associate with the growth of postmodernism to start to segment and to start to identify the particularities of experiences as opposed to certain overarching commonalities in experience of being the racially oppressed. And it's interesting when we look at the designation Black, when our common oppressors from Europe and North America used those terms initially, they did not restrict those terms to people of African descent. The United States, for example, when it carried out its genocidal war against the Filipino people from 1899 to about 1910, saw in the Filipino people, they described them as Black, or they would call them niggers. Europeans would use the term Black as a way to designate other racially oppressed people, and this has become very, very important because it wasn't because there was not a restriction to using that term if you were of African descent. It was a term that was used to designate an inferiority. It was connecting race and inferiority and not just oppression. When the oppressed started seizing the term, we flipped it on the oppressor. And we started using the term as a way of designating, irrespective of our ethnic identity, our commonality in the struggle against racial oppression and racist oppression. It wasn't ignoring national particularities. It wasn't saying that if you were in South Asia that you were the same as if you were in Algeria, or if you were in South Africa, or if you were in the Trinidad or the United States, but it was saying that there was actually something that we shared in common that that was really, really important for us to recognize. And to some extent, that has been lost over the years, in part because of postmodernism, and in part because of this fixation on ethno-national particularities. The importance of Black, the way it's identified by the TUC, and I would argue the way it had been identified by Biko, is also important in understanding that settler colonialism is a racial project. That the settler colonialism in Ireland in the 1500s and 1600s was in fact a racial project. It wasn't simply the occupation of Ireland, it was the complete racial subordination of the indigenous people of Ireland by the English. That the settler colonialism carried out against the Palestinian people is not simply the annexation of land, it's the complete and total racial subordination of the Palestinian people. The US seizure of the land of the indigenous and the land of the Chicano, the Mexican Americans, was not simply an expansionist project, as bad as that may be. It wasn't akin to just simply the seizure of Crimea by Russia. No, it was a racial subordination of the people there. It was the identification that these people, in addition to simply being oppressed, were defined by the oppressor as inferior and irrelevant, that their entire experiences were irrelevant, and that therefore their lives were irrelevant, which means that when we look at something like Black Lives Matter does not mean, should not be interpreted as meaning simply that the lives of US African Americans matter, as important as that is. But it should also mean that the lives of the indigenous in the United States matter. In fact, police deaths, or the deaths as a result of police action in the United States, are disproportionately more for the indigenous than any other population in the United States. Black Lives Matter should mean that the lives of Puerto Ricans matter when they face the genocide as a result of the way that the United States handled the Hurricane Maria tragedy. That the Hurricane Maria tragedy was not simply a natural disaster, but it was compounded by the genocidal actions of the United States government towards the Puerto Rican people. I would argue a direct racial, racist response, settler colonialism. That Black Lives Matter also applies to Palestine, to the way that, in fact, Palestinian lives don't matter as far as the oppressor is concerned. That the lives of Palestinian children can be disregarded because their lives, in fact, don't matter. What are the implications of this? And I have less than 2 minutes. The implications are several. That the anti-racist project must be a project of the working class. It's not a project for the NGOs. It's not a project for other movements. It's not just a project for the racially oppressed. It must be a project of the working class, and it must counter the divisions within the class. That international solidarity must not simply be workers of the world unite. And it's not just workers and oppressed people of the world unite, as important as that is. It is workers and oppressed people unite, not just about capitalism, but in taking on settler colonialism and racist oppression. And that this anti-racism includes opposition to settler colonial states, opposition and the penalization of xenophobia, that the struggle against xenophobia is a class project that must be undertaken. And that we also have to demonstrate time and again that the anti-racist project is a project in which white workers have to be enlisted. It's not just a project for those of us that are racially oppressed. It is a project of the white workers as well. Their material interest lies in defeating racist oppression, national oppression, and xenophobia. And I'm out of time. Thank you very much, comrades.
Thank you so much, Bill, for that analysis. I thought that was a really, really important contribution to our discussion this afternoon. And one that I hope we're able to pick up during the discussion with comrades who are listening or watching our discussions. Can I move on to our next speaker, Zaneli Matabula, who is the Deputy International Secretary of the Congress of South African Trade Unions. And before I offer the floor to our comrade, can I just say that, I mean, for me, it's particularly important that we have somebody from COSATU on the call. Growing up, one of the absolute pivotal movements for me that got me involved in politics, that got me involved in trade unionism, was the struggle against apartheid. And watching the organising of comrades such as Jane Naidu and people like that was extraordinarily inspiring for me. Comrade, I'm delighted that you're able to join us. Thank you so much for giving up your valuable time to come and talk with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Roger. Thank you to TUC for giving us this opportunity to join in this conversation. First of all, we want to pledge our solidarity again with the people of Palestine. South Africa is currently observing Israel Apartheid Week in solidarity with the workers and the working people of Palestine. So we pledge our solidarity yet again. I think one of the most important issues for us is to say their names. In South Africa, 2011, Andres Tatane was killed, gunned down by police in a protest, very peaceful protest, while he was trying to calm the situation down. In 2016, a student, Shaira Kala, was shot 13 times while fleeing from police during a student protest. A week ago, Mtokozi Sintumba was gunned down by police during a student's protest while he was a bystander. I think it's very important for us to say their names and remember them. The state of South African race relations remains an issue based on racial hierarchies created by the apartheid that continue to plague our country. Racism in South Africa is institutionalized. It doesn't matter who the police are, whether they are Black, colored, or white, or Indian, or Chinese. All of them are operating under the institution. Racial identities were installed by a system that breed inequality and discrimination. Thus today, society is committed to their racial identities. However, increasingly people are becoming aware that their racial identities should not count as a measure of their social value, but to reject the racial stereotypes. South Africa suffers from a structural inequality and discrimination. Young South Africans are socialized into a highly racialized society and experience severe disparities. Eradicating racialism without dismantling the material inequalities is a near impossible task for South Africa. The system has long given license for violence against Black bodies anywhere in the world. The experience of Black people are very similar. Take, for example, the case of George Floyd and the case of Andres Tatane. Both of them, their killing was made public through videos that were shared on social media, and there was global outroar regarding their killing that basically sparked the overwhelming support by the global Black people who stood against racism. Police brutality and use of excessive force has been an experience of South Africa for a long time, since the colonialism, from the brutal murder of Steve Biko in the police custody to the 1976 uprising with school children killed in police racial profiling. Racial profiling is still very much an issue today in South Africa in terms of how police treat Black people. And by Black people, it's very similar today after our freedom, that it is defined nearly similar to how Unite is defining it. So the trade union action is now more than ever urgent. Trade union has been organizing and bargaining against racism at work in terms of policy gaps, pay gaps, health and safety, and working conditions for racialized workers. Trade unions should ensure to build a COVID solidarity fund to fund initiatives aimed to economic redress, since we know that COVID-19 exposed harsh realities of our unequal society. One of the areas that we thought when answering the question on how we can build an international Black workers movement against racism is that we might need to target our labor policies for protection of immigrants and create networks of unions from both receiving and sending countries. As you all may know, that South Africa has been experiencing sporadic attacks on migrant workers, as well as all those that are operating shops in South Africa, different provinces. Recently, in the past week, we know that KZN, which is KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, They've experienced serious attacks on shops owned by non-South Africans, spiraling the notion of xenophobic attacks, which we felt that as South Africa, we don't allow or promote such behavior. So the trade union plays a very pivotal role in ensuring that labor migrants, wherever they are in South Africa, are protected. But the thing is that one of the problems that we experience is that the trade union movement finds itself in a catch-22 situation where it must protect migrant workers while at the same time protecting local indigenous workers that are being pitted against each other by the business that employs migrant workers and exploiting them to a point where they're not allowed to join unions, but still the trade union must protect their rights, while the workers of South Africa that are protected by the law find themselves in a situation where they're saying that the migrant workers are taking their jobs. So it's a catch-22 situation that I think is one of the areas that might need us to build a very strong international movement where we talk and build each other in terms of organizing migrant workers, which is the role that the trade union movement should take over. The pandemic exposed very harsh realities where we found that a lot of migrant workers who are predominantly Black and African origin find themselves not being able to access social protection, issues of healthcare, and also unemployment grants. And today we are happy to say that the trade union movement in South Africa has been able to fight for those workers' rights to ensure that those workers do get the recognition that they deserve and the protections that they deserve. We believe, like Bill said earlier on, that the issue of anti-racism is not just an issue of racialized people, but it is a working class issue. And it should be one of the issues that are taken very seriously and picked up by the trade union movement all over the world. And they must build international solidarity around this issue and run with it. And the issue of building collective actions as one human race and not by racialized categories that were given by apartheid regimes or imperialist tendencies or colonial masters. So those are some of the issues that we thought that are quite critical for us, but also building a strong trade union that breaks borders and addresses the tensions of labor migration, particularly of Black African descendant, but also not taking away from other Black bodies. We need to address the meritocracy, which is the individual hard work pays dividends, which sentiments, the sentiments that are used to socialize young people in schools and at homes, because this is the very notion that kills our young people and still builds, all right, I'm wrapping up, that still builds that sort of like restructures the racial tensions that continue to reappear and raise ugly head. So that's one of the areas that we think should be dealt with, just to make sure that the collective actions are maintained and are shared amongst all trade union movements. Thank you so much.
Thank you, comrade. Thank you for that contribution. I was reminded while you were speaking, of course, that the UN Day for the Elimination of Race Discrimination that we observed this weekend is on the day that commemorates the Sharpeville massacre of 1960. Of course, it took another 19 years after that before the United Nations decided to commemorate it with a day for the elimination against racism. But nevertheless, it's really, really important, I think, that we remember where that struggle came from. I think it's also a real shame that so many of the attempts for some more impetus behind this struggle against racism come when some of our people get killed. And George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, Sharpeville massacre in the UK, Stephen Lawrence, all of these things come out of Black people getting killed. And I'll talk about it a bit later on, but I think it's time to move beyond that. Can I move to our final speaker? Last but absolutely by no means least, Anatalina Lourenco is the Secretary for Combating Racism of CUT, which is the Unified Workers Central of Brazil. And absolutely delighted, comrade, that you're able to join us. I think one of the most impressive things about this panel is that we've got some real examples of people who are trying to organize right at the sharp end of struggle. And nowhere more is that the case than in Brazil right at this moment, with a far right leader of that country. But I'm sure we're going to hear how the trade union movement in Brazil is working to fight back against that oppression. So, comrade, you're really welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, Roger, I'd like to thank TUC for the invitation to be here. It is important to be a part of this debate at the moment. I think it's essential, actually. While I was listening to our comrades that spoke before me, I thought about how much racism operates globally as an almost perfect crime. And I say almost perfect because it faces the resistance of each and every one of us. Let me introduce myself first. I am Anatalina Lourenco, and I am from CUT, but I am also in the education business. I am a public teacher in São Paulo, and I am a union leader, and I am part of the fight against racism here in Brazil. And my work in these different spaces is necessary because the anti-racism fight, as I said, it leads us to different fronts. It is necessary in different fronts. I heard our comrades talking about the reality of their countries. So, coming to Brazil, I would like to talk to you about the scenario a little bit. Brazil has currently 48% of the Black population in the informal work market. They either work for apps or they have informal jobs, and they work when they have work. Vaccination in Brazil is extremely slow. The pandemic impacted directly Black people, especially Black women. The level of domestic violence has tripled, and women that got killed, and mainly Black women, has unfortunately been a number that went up massively. This is what we've been facing. 72% of poor people in Brazil are Black. 57% of the Brazilian population is Black. Men and women who are Black, and young people. So, talking about murder and how invisible Black bodies are, here people mention the names of those who fell, mainly due to the institutions. Here in Brazil, it's no different. From each 10 people killed in Brazil, 7 are Black and young. In November, one day before we celebrated the 20th of November, which in Brazil is the National Day for Black Awareness, which is the day that we remember Zumbi dos Palmares, which was the main expression of fight for freedom. He founded the Quilombo of Palmares, which was the main and first democracy in our country. In Palmares, we didn't just have Black people that were running away from slavery, but everybody that was suffering some sort of oppression were welcomed. Well, so we celebrated on the 20th of November, and one day before celebrating or commemorating Black awareness and our fight for public policies that are including of Black people, we had the murder of Joao Alberto. He was a worker who was killed inside a supermarket, an international chain, Carrefour. Many might know this name. And he also died because he was kept for too long, asphyxiated by policemen. He was beaten and asphyxiated. For what reason? No reason. The color of his skin was the main defining factor for him to be another victim. This month, I don't want to use the word commemorate. I want to use the word rememorate. We are remembering the murder of our lower house member, Marielle Franco, who was murdered because she fought against the militia, which operate mainly in the slums, and they dispute with drug dealers and oppress workers, especially workers that live in the slums. And Marielle Franco was killed. This has been 3 years ago now, and we still haven't found who was the person responsible for that crime. And we also reached March with almost 300,000 people who died due to COVID-19. And here there is a crime that is going on. There is a genocide against the population, and especially the Black population, which is the poorest in this country. When we have a government that has no public policies to save lives, that doesn't invest in healthcare, that doesn't buy vaccines, it's unfortunately the contrary. We have a government that is going against science and stimulates people to go and work and get together on the streets. I'm so sorry I don't have much time. I'd like to say within these 2 minutes that in the next 21st of March, we'll be once again globally reinforcing that we cannot be quiet any longer. There is a proposal here I'd like to mention, which is the following. We need to appropriate ourselves of this theme, and we need to have concrete conditions to develop a fight against racism in the world, not just in Africa and America. I mean the whole of America, I mean Europe, I mean Asia, everywhere. We cannot any longer allow racism to operate as the almost perfect crime. Thank you very much. And the CUT nowadays is fighting against racism, but more than that, nowadays our shout is out with Bolsonaro. We cannot tolerate the genocide of the Brazilian population. Thank you very much, and sorry for taking so long. And I am open to questions and to talk to everyone. And talking about the struggles that CUT Brazil has been facing and how we've been trying to bring more dignity to workers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, comrade. And your timekeeping was superb. So don't worry about that. But I'm hoping that anyway, during the next part of the meeting, that we're able to pick up on the issues that all of our comrades were raising during their contributions, because clearly not enough time for folks to really get into detail of the sort of things that they were raising. Before we go into some of the questions that are starting to come in. I feel moved to make a little contribution of my own, because I mean, one of the things that's kind of occurred to me throughout all of the discussions that we've had this afternoon so far, but also generally at the moment that I'm hearing, is there's a lot of people who feel very comfortable about saying Black Lives Matter. It's almost a badge of honor, almost a fashion statement for people to do that, and then at the same time do very little to support the anti-racist cause, or actually sometimes they turn around and commit acts that disproportionately affect Black people. And let me give you an example. There's a local authority, a council, municipal authority in London called Tower Hamlets, where the council there decided that, you know, there was a whole thing during last year of people going out onto their doorsteps and applauding on a Thursday night for care workers, many of whom are Black, and many of whom are Black women. And people felt very comfortable about doing that, and having selfies taken of them doing that applause for care workers. And then in Tower Hamlets, and it's happened elsewhere as well, but I'm picking on Tower Hamlets in particular, what they did was that they then decided that they wanted to make big changes in the structure of their employment. So they dismissed all of their workers and re-engaged them on worse terms and conditions. And many of those workers were Black. And there seems to be a disconnect between people feeling able to say Black Lives Matters and what they actually do to Black workers within the workplace. And for me, it's time to move the discussion on where people feel able to do something like, say, Black Lives Matters, or run around and say, we need to, there's the other one was, we need to turn this moment into a movement, is what they keep saying. But they do nothing, and they treat Black workers worse. But they think that they can do all of that. Now, I think there's a big task there for us as trade unionists, and also as people who are interested in the unity of the working class, for what is it that we can do to build the voice of working people in the workplace, but also in particular, in the terms of this conference, the voice of Black workers, so that those people who think that they can get away with a fashion statement understand that we won't allow it to happen. And actually, it doesn't matter whether it's in the UK, whether it's in South Africa, whether it's in the USA, whether it's in Palestine, or whether it's in Brazil, that we'll stand up for equality and we'll build power for working people within their workplaces, because essentially that's the way that we need, that real change is going to take place. So those are some of the thoughts that have been going through my head. Maybe one more before I start taking the questions, and that is the whole concept of Black Lives Matter. I think I've heard people say, well, when did we move from we want Black power to we want, you know, Black Lives Matter? When did we ever make that move? And shouldn't we be arguing for something stronger, more forceful? I understand the forcefulness of the Black Lives Matters kind of call, but I'm hearing more and more that assertion that we need to reassert the Black radical tradition, frankly, that we know is there. And maybe the Black Lives Matters movement has gone some way towards helping us to do that. But is there anything else that we can do, I suppose? So those are some of the thoughts that are going through my head, but maybe folks can pick that up during some of those thoughts up during the conversation. But if I could turn for a minute to some of the questions that are coming through. The one that I'll start with is, I'd like your views, and this is from Balram Sampler, who says, I would like your views on caste-based discrimination, which is one of the worst forms of racism. It affects over 250 million people in the Indian subcontinent. The untouchables, known as Dalits, suffer daily atrocities, but their plight is ignored. So has anybody got any views on that? So if you just indicate. Yeah, come in, Bill.
Yeah, the caste oppression precedes the development of capitalism. And what the British were very effective in doing is, as they did in many other places that they occupied, which was to take a particular situation and manipulate it for the purposes of advancing British colonialism. And the work against caste discrimination in the subcontinent has been very inconsistent over the years. And more recently, with the rise of this crypto-fascist organization, the BJP, the ruling party, it has, instead of taking a stand, even a liberal stand against it, is in fact advancing it. And advancing the caste discrimination as well as the anti-Muslim oppression that exists in India. So when we're talking about racism, it is absolutely essential that we join in that discussion the issue of opposition to caste and the opposition to the racialization of Islam. That the attacks on Islam are not simply xenophobic. It really is correct, I think, to talk about anti-Muslim racism.
Thank you, Bill. I've got a question that's directly to Aisha, which is, it's from Councillor Ahmed Ali. And he says, Aisha is talking about control on land, people, resources, water, food, electricity, movement of people, no workers' rights, triple discrimination for women, etc. What is it that the TUC in the UK can do to help and support our Palestinian comrades?
أكيد إحنا
Definitely,
سعيدين.
we are happy that there are initiatives to have solidarity with the Palestinian people. All these initiatives which we spoke about in the start, there should be in two directions. First, in the role to pressurize against all breaches against that there is, for example, the committee of the fact-seeking committee in order to find out the reality about these breaches, and also with the Palestinian Federation of Trade Unions, so that they can see themselves the real breaches which I was speaking about against our workers and our families. In spite of all the circumstances we are facing in our trade unions with respect to this occupation, we have also common cooperation and solidarity with all the workers in Palestine, so that they can live in dignity and so that they do not affect their lives. It is spoken about nearly 92,000 workers, whether male and female, who are Palestinian and working in the occupied territories. There should be solidarity in all levels, whether in trade unions or with the international community, or in the relation to defend the rights of these workers. Thank you.
No, thank you. I want to pick up on there's another question that's come in. This one's from Christine McMillan. And maybe it'd be good to get all of your perspectives on this, and maybe start with you, Zaneli, on this. So the question is, do you think things are changing, but it's too slow? With more people on both sides, black, white, any background, standing together, are we moving, finally moving, but is it just too slow at times? So do you think change is happening? I'll go around all of the panel on that one, because I think that's quite a broad question for folks.
Yeah, it's quite broad, but I do believe that the change is happening. I think the moment that we've all been waiting for finally happened when global organizing happened, with collectivism that has happened through the Black Lives Matter, since it happened in the US and it moved to the UK, Europe, and in Africa. So I think there is an element of change, but also the situation is forcing us to talk about the elephant in the room called racism. And for us in South Africa, for example, we didn't have that opportunity to actually discuss racism up until recently, when now it is an issue, a topical issue globally, and it is forcing us to face it and start talking about it. And people that practice it are being called out. And I think time is different now compared to the past. So I think there is some change, but it's very slow. It's at a snail's pace, but at least something is happening, and we are starting to talk and converge and collaborate and collectively work towards change. So I think the movement is growing, and it takes all of us, black, white, everybody, to actually act against racism.
Roger, if I can just jump in, because I'm going to have to sign off, unfortunately. I agree with the comrade. I think that there's been very positive change, but there has also been intense backlash. And what we have to understand is that progress is not inevitable. The only thing that's inevitable is death. And that our movements and history demonstrates it time and again, can zigzag forward, there can be major reversals, etc. And that's why we cannot allow passivity. We cannot fall prey to the idea that there's nothing really that we need to do because truth will rise again, that type of thing. Additionally, what we've been seeing has been, over the last number of years, has been the rise of right-wing populist movements, some of which have become neo-fascist in their character, that have been attempting to overthrow all of the victories of the 20th century. The victories on the rights of women, indigenous, racially oppressed groups, et cetera, workers. And so there's this front, this right-wing populist front, that is attempting to not only block change, but to reverse things. And we need to make that central to the work of the trade union movement and other socially just movements. And I have to apologize that I have to sign off. The time zone, I stumbled on the time zone, and I have another activity I have to go to. But thank you again for inviting me to participate, Roger.
No, Bill, pleasure as always, comrade, and we need to catch up soon on a few things as well, and we will do. But thank you, brother, for giving us the time.
The best of the panel.
And can I
أنا بقدر أحكي. Okay.
Can I speak myself?
Sure, go ahead.
Definitely, I see that it is a process. This is really slow, but there are some serious steps against racism, and I think if there is accumulation in these meetings, and this webinar is one of the elements for change. So if we are interested in having a change, we should all show solidarity. There will be a national and international campaign to oppose discrimination in all its forms. So we need to live in peace. There will be no comprehensive peace in the world without having equality and real justice. If we need justice, and this is these are the emblems of big nations, there will be no real social justice without having real equality of all human beings, whether white or black, or even those who have suffering from occupation. We in Palestine, as we said, we show solidarity with you because what is being exercised against us, the breaches against us. So I have great hopes that these webinars and these events and these big campaigns will have impact if we all work collectively in order to change this bad situation into a better situation.
Thank you. Anatolina, do you want to jump in?
Claro.
Of course. I would like to say that capitalism is cyclical, as the reaction towards capitalism is too. So we have certain times when we have advances, but also setbacks, many setbacks. We had here in my country very recently a very bad setback where we had rights being taken away, exacerbation of racism, violence, institutional racism that is taking place so as to exclude people, and necropolitics as the main weapon of the governments in power. However, in face of all this, we also had some progress in municipal elections of last year, for example. In many Brazilian cities, we elected Black women, Black young women, trans women, LGBT women. We had many of these women being elected in very many places, and this was very important because it is in the councils and in the legislative chambers that we need to be, because we need to be there to change laws and build laws that bring dignity to people's lives, to populations who are excluded, marginalized, and to those minority groups in society. So there was some progress. But of course, amongst all this, we sometimes lose track of these advances because we place ourselves in the debate where we talk about these setbacks. And then sometimes we can't believe or even praise these advances, but they are there and they do take place. Nothing is going to stop us. We have a Brazilian female poet, Conceição Evaristo. They got together to kill us, but we decided that we were not going to die. And I think this is our progress. But I would like to say, I don't know how much more time we have, but to say that it's absolutely urgent to organize a real reaction towards racism. Because everyone by themselves, we will never be able to get anywhere. But when we come together, when we organize ourselves in a global struggle, I believe that this will then become so big that it will be impossible to stop. And that is when we will be able to make them go back, the racists, the oppressors, the colonizers. A global organization against racism is absolutely essential. So therefore, trade organizations, unions organizing workers all over the world must be in the struggle. They must put this agenda as being in the center of the struggle. We cannot be something to be debated as a single item. When we talk about working class struggles, we're talking about minority populations and not talking about in terms of numbers, but people who don't have access to the main amount of wealth. These people are with us. So the struggle of the working class is not something that happened yesterday in the Russian Revolution. It happens now. It is taking place in now. So unions and organizations that represent workers must own this debate. Not just own this debate, it is also necessary that this debate becomes the main agenda. When we fight against hunger, we're fighting against hungers of thousands and millions of workers who are Black, Palestinian, Indians in their minority castes, people in Africa, our comrades in Africa. So when I fight against hunger, I'm talking about an anti-racist policy. When I fight for democracy, I'm also saying that I cannot have democracy when we have racism. So democracy, the struggle for democracy must include the anti-racist struggle. Therefore, these struggles must come together because they are all part, and we are all part of the working class. And the unions, the federations and confederations must come together, organize globally to face this. I'm sorry if I went over time.
That's not a problem. I didn't give you a time, so it was a great contribution. I mean, it's kind of raised a few questions in my head. Obviously, there's a few questions that have come in from the viewers, but I wanted to turn to you next, Zaneli, in terms of what you were saying earlier on about the difficulties that are being experienced about race in South Africa now. Which I'm guessing if people are watching this or anything like me, they're thinking, what, issues of race? I thought there was a massive change that took place in South Africa. So how is that playing out? But more importantly, I suppose, what is it that COSATU is doing to contribute towards challenging those issues of racism that you mentioned earlier on?
Thank you, Roger. Yeah, I think, South Africa, like I said when I started, that South Africa emerges from a very, very bad situation of doctrine through the apartheid system, where South Africans were basically isolated from the rest of the region and the continent. And South Africans were made to think as if they are not part of Africa. And because of that, now we experience a very, very bad situation of Black on Black violence, where labor migrants that are basically of African origin are not necessarily well integrated into the communities in South Africa, and there's no social cohesion or enough social cohesion within South Africa. And because of that, these are some of the legacies of the apartheid system. But COSATU, in its bid to try and counter this now, recently, because of the COVID situation that basically exposed the level of inequality and the level or deepening of segregation or racial discrimination based on, maybe we can say, ethnicity, because most of the people that are basically excluded are of African descent and they're labor migrants. So basically what COSATU has done, it has intervened in terms of protecting these migrant workers, for them to receive protection, for them to have access to healthcare during the COVID-19, for them to have access to food during the lockdown. Because most of the people that got affected, we all know that were mostly poor people and basically mostly migrants who did not have access to anything, any income or anything like that. So basically, what we've done is then to include them in all the negotiations that took place at what we call NEDLEG, which is a tripartite institution in South Africa. We include their demands and their issues when we discuss. But further to that, we as COSATU are now developing a labor migration policy that seeks to address the issue of organizing of labor migrants into trade union movement for ensuring their protection against exploitation, against inequality, and for them to be able to access social protection. So we have that, but also over and above, the adoption of the national minimum wage is one of those tools that we are using to ensure that those that are employed in South Africa that are non-South Africans receive the same minimum wage to avoid the situation where locals are being pitted against immigrants in terms of employment and in terms of pay gaps and salaries. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do. And also intervening and speaking out and running educational programs for South Africans in terms of dealing on, or in terms of social cohesion and integration to avoid the situation of xenophobic tendencies. So we do that provincially and we move from province to province. Right now, the focus area is in KwaZulu-Natal, where we are experiencing more and more attacks on non-South Africans. So it's an issue of black on black violence. But over and above that, emerging from South Africa that we know, recently with the killings of students and also the situation of white supremacy that is stemming up all over the world, it has reared its ugly head in South Africa as well. And this has allowed an opportunity that we take on the campaign of anti-racism in South Africa and embracing the movement of Black Lives Matter in order for us to address and redress the situation of South Africa. So there is work that is being done through the alliance partners, the ANC, which is a political party, the SACP, the vanguard of the workers, as well as COSATU, to try and come up with activities and campaigns that seek to teach and educate South Africans, all of them, colored, Black, Indian, all of them, to put them in one way of thinking, but also to try and call out those that are practicing racism. They've been arrested, they've been convictions, some of them are in jail as we speak because of that practice of racism. So the zero tolerance mantra is being now pushed by the trade union movement and the citizens of South Africa as a whole, to ensure that those that practice racism are called out and embarrassed publicly so that this particular issue stops. Thank you.
Thank you. That's great. I wanted to turn to Aisha and just ask a question about, I don't know if you're still there, as you're not on screen. Hopefully you're still there and you can hear me. Yeah, great. I just wanted to ask a question about what's happening in terms of the vaccine in Palestine, and maybe if you could say about what access there has been to the vaccine for the Palestinian people.
The vaccination hasn't been received to all group in Palestine. Even our all workers who were supposed to be provided with the vaccination by the occupied authorities, they haven't received it and they haven't been accounted to them. Now, so the Israelis will receive the vaccination first. Just a few number of vaccination has been received to Palestinian, and there are a huge number of infected people and a high rate of mortality in the hospitals. The hospitals can't really accommodate a large number. And of course, the Palestinian workers will pay the price. The union tried during this pandemic that there is an agreement between the private sector and the union to protect the right of workers, and it was a positive move. However, in reality, it was very problematic to implement. also the Palestinian women, the worker Palestinian women in a difficult situation in any aspect of our contribution in the job market. We had a problem with working remotely, especially digital ways of working. In Palestine, we are a poor nation, and some families are basically the breadwinner of these families are women. However, they are under the poverty line, and they are suffering from hunger. And there is no way for those families to get the technologies, to get computers. And of course, they can provide for their children to get computers and to learn remotely and online. And this is really a challenge. We need support for the vaccination, and that the vaccination can be provided to all the people in Palestine. Thank you.
No, thank you. Right. No, I heard something. No, I was wondering if we could move on to, I suppose, something that just pulls together a lot of the things that we've been talking about. So we've talked a lot about what's been happening in Brazil, what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in South Africa. How do we, US, when Bill was here, I've said a little bit about the UK. How do we pull these struggles together? How do we actually start to develop this global alliance, global unity against racism? How can we practically start to get that done? Maybe start with you, Anatolina, some thoughts about maybe some of the things that we can do. But also, could I there's a question that I've had directly to you as well. Maybe you could pick this up, which is about the what role Coutts is playing in terms of the 21 days against racism campaign. So maybe if you could pick that up as well, but particularly just maybe move us towards a discussion about building that global unity against racism.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to answer about CUT's role on the 21M. We are organizing that. We are on the 21st, along with several other organizations of the Black and social movements in Brazil, which includes political parties on this campaign. We also have a permanent campaign that we are bringing to this movement, which is Enough Racism in Work and Life. Last year, when João Alberto was murdered in Carrefour, CUT was able to get a national meeting with several entities, several institutions of the Black movement, and MPs from the Senate and the Congress. And with these MPs, we had a dialogue. And from that meeting, we decided to create a commission to investigate and follow up the situation in Rio Grande do Sul, which is where the murder happened. Secondly, we said that Congress should position themselves and started rethinking racial policies in Brazil. And beyond that, they should create a specific legislation that would protect workers at their workplace. At the moment, we are fighting against hunger because Brazil is again on the hunger map. And we have thousands of families that live on the streets and under the hunger line. So what we are proposing is a solidarity campaign amongst workers. Now, with regards to this global unit, Roger, I said before that what I think is necessary is a world organization. I think the unions have that role. I think it's necessary for the unions to organize the fight in a global level. So TUC, UNISON, the United States, everybody, all the countries that have union confederations that operate and that act on the protection of workers' dignity. And we can't fight without financial investment. This is obvious, especially now. So I think maybe an international fund for us to be able to organize this fight is necessary, with the participation of the countries that I mentioned and the participation of countries which have the ability to contribute, maybe a higher ability than others. Obviously, some countries won't be able to contribute, but others will be able to. Other unions can maybe have a bigger role, financially speaking. So a specific international fund, just like the one we have for environmental reasons, why not doing that for racism? And finance local, regional institutions, because the fight, the struggle is done locally and internationally. Marx said that the struggle is internal and external. So alone, I can't do anything. I need to do it collectively, but each one of us is responsible as well. We need to build collectively, and this is my proposal. This is the proposal the CUT brings to contribute towards this fight, aiming at protecting workers and Black people all over the world.
That's a really, really interesting contribution and proposal that I think needs some more discussion, and let's look at how we can maybe make something like that happen. I think Zaneli, you wanted to come back. Let Zaneli come first, and I'll bring you in, Aisha, as well after that.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. I think one of the biggest issues that we have, that I think I picked up during the growth of the Black Lives Matter, is that there's so much collective anger that is there in the world around the issue of racism. But I feel like we need to have more anger and more outrage against racism in order for us to get to where we want to get. So it all takes us to do a collective input so that we get that going. But we need to build global campaigns for social justice and equality. Maybe not equality, perhaps we must look at equity rather than equality, because we've been talking equality for ages, but there's no movement. There's not much movement there. So perhaps we need to look at the issue of equity a little bit. And also we need to start dismantling of racial categories that have been put out there that describes our ethnicity, so that we stop this them and us and have like a full human race. So starting to dismantle this, for example, in South Africa, we've had 4 categories: Black, Indian, colored, and white during the apartheid regime's time. But now we've got Black that encompasses everybody that is not white. Just like your description of what we mean when we talk about Black. So basically, some of the issues that we thought were quite important for us to raise was, one, the issue of silencing of the guns and the militarization of our nations, which is one of the issues that we think we need real convergence around. Because with the guns that are out there all over the place, that's why there's so much violence against Black bodies, because of these guns. Of course, I talked about collective actions. But then again, the issue of uncapturing the minds of Black people through capacity building, teaching our members, teaching our society about racism and how they can stop racism and what needs to be done, because all of us are responsible to challenge racial stereotypes and discrimination. So for us to build up that movement of education and making sure that we are out there and heard. Fourthly, the use of social media and media in general to ensure that our messages are put out there and that our members hear us and we all speak in one voice and regularly as possible. So those are some of the areas that we thought maybe we need to raise as some of the areas that we might want to look into in terms of dealing with this issue. But the main issue is the issue, okay, there's two more issues that I left out. The issue of finding a point of convergence for transformation as a trade union movement. So all of us need to find that one point of convergence and all of us must move for transformation. And then the second one is to deal with the issue of finding an ethical supply chain campaign with trade unions holding government, multinational companies accountable for their behavior and their entrenching and deepening of racial discrimination in the workplace. So those are some of the areas that I thought I might want to push through.
Thank you very much. So we're moving towards the last couple of minutes. So Aisha, you get to say a few words and then before I wind up. Thank you.
Muted.
Aisha.
Not getting.
Aisha, you're muted.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, صوت واضح.
Is it clear now?
Yeah, good.
Of course, I reiterate what my colleagues have said, but also I want to talk about a global campaign so we all live together in coherence. This is a campaign that should be on a global level. There is no equality to be achieved if we can recohabitate with each other. And also, the importance. We need to think about the losses that we had with racism, and we need to highlight on the areas that doesn't really suffer from racism and to be an example. Also, all the elements that is related to work, especially that we all talk about the workers, how we need to have a decent work without discrimination. It has that there is within this good environment, there should be a decent work without discrimination. All people should live in dignity. We need to have also a motto that can be spread out throughout the unions. For example, the 21 days, for example, it should be something, a campaign of a global campaign. And it is a shout, a call out from to all the unions and to be against the organization who exercise racism. We need supporters, advocates who can support us for anti-racism campaigns. Thank you.
No, thank you, comrade. Important contribution. Yet again, all the contributions that we've had this afternoon I found really inspiring. I want to thank each of you, and Anna-Talina, Zaneli, Aisha, and of course our comrade Bill Fletcher, who had to leave us earlier on. But we can't let this just be the conversation, and that's where it ends. We have to continue the conversation, and most importantly, we have to build something, I think, that is going to ensure that we can globalize this struggle against racism, because we cannot allow, I think our Palestinian comrades, our Brazilian comrades, our South African comrades, just to think that the fight is, that they're alone in the fight. We cannot do that, because people will not win that fight. I think if anything that we've learned in history is that when we stand up internationally, when we stand up together in unity and solidarity together, then sometimes we have setbacks, but we have a better chance of being able to defeat the people who are trying to turn us against each other, who are trying to use racism as a way of defeating the working class. And so I genuinely want to thank each of you for your contributions this afternoon. It's actually genuinely been my absolute honor to be able to spend this afternoon with you and to hear your thoughts. I mentioned to you earlier on before the call started that I'm inviting you back for something else, each of you, to come and do something with us in unison, and we're going to do that. So we'll make sure that contact happens for an event that we're putting together on May Day. And if there was ever a day when we needed to talk about international solidarity, it's May Day, of course. But once again, thank you for giving us your valuable time this afternoon. Thanks for the team at the TUC for all the technical support for this discussion as well, and for arranging the invitations to this. And thanks everybody for tuning in, watching, and for sending in your questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to take all of your questions, but I'm sure you'll agree with me that we've had a really rich discussion this afternoon that sets us up really brilliantly for the rest of our TUC Black Workers Conference. So thank you, comrades, and I'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you.